Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I pray that y'all are having a blessed and beautiful day. And without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, so in my last video, we talked about the fall of Jericho and how the fall of Jericho, that story in itself, God was showing us that his instructions are not always going to make sense. Him having them walk around the wall of Jericho 7 times, like, I know that seemed odd to them, but God was testing their faith and testing their obedience to see if they're going to obey him. And when they did, breakthrough happened. God was able to do the impossible, to actually move through their obedience. And that's what God is trying to show us today, that when we're obedient, when we follow him, even when the world is looking at us crazy or God's instructions seem crazy to other people, God's ways are higher than our ways. And so we just got to trust that he knows better than us. He knows us better than anybody else. And so we got to just trust him and obey. Okay, and so in this video, we are in Judges and we are going to be talking about the idolatry of the tribe Dan. And baby, when I read like Judges, it's kind of hard to read, but Judges represented darkness. Like the people didn't have any king. This was when I believe Joshua, the leader that was leading, that God chose to lead the Israelites through the promised land, Joshua died. And so they don't have a king, they don't have a leader that God has appointed yet. But God pointed out something to me that's so important and that we see so much of today. And let's just get into it. Right, so I want you guys to turn with me to Judges 18, and I won't read the whole thing. I want you guys to read the whole thing though, but for the sake of this video, we're just gonna read bits and pieces. And so first, let's read Judges 18 verse 1. Now in those days, Israel had no king, and the tribe of Dan was trying to find a place where they could settle, for they had not yet moved into the land assigned to them, when the land was divided among the tribes of Israel. So the men of Dan chose from their clans 5 capable warriors from the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol to scout out the land for them to settle in. And so now let's skip down to verse 7. So the 5 men went on to the town of Laish, where they noticed the people living carefree lives like the Sidonites. They were peaceful and secure. The people were also wealthy because their land was very fertile, and they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. So you can see here so far that they're trying to seek a land that they want to take. And they notice a land that looks easy for them to take, looks peaceful, fertile. So a land that has good produce. And so they are planning to attack this land. Let's go to verse 27. Then with Micaiah's idols and his priests, the men of Dan came to the town of Laish, whose people were peaceful and secure. They attacked with swords and burned the town to the ground. There was no one to rescue the people, for they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. This happened in the valley near Beth Rehob. Then the people of the tribe of Dan rebuilt the town and lived there. They renamed the town Dan after their ancestors, Israel's son, but it had originally been called Laish. Then they set up the carved image, and they appointed Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, as their priest. This family continued as priests of the tribe of Dan until the exile. So Micaiah's carved image was worshipped by the tribe of Dan as long as the tabernacle of God remained at Shiloh. So I had to dive in a little deeper to really grasp and read this thing a few times to really grasp what was going on. And here's what God revealed to me. And so if you go back into Numbers, I believe 19, you see that God was giving the tribe of Joshua was giving Joshua, the tribe of Dan, he was giving them land to conquer, but it wasn't easy. And so Dan's land that God had called him to conquer, that God was trying to give him, he they got intimidated because the people were wicked, the people just were intimidating. And so Dan failed to conquer the land that God had given them. But Joshua and Caleb, they were able to conquer the land because you can also see and look back in the previous chapters that when they were scouting the land, they came back to tell the people that they can surely conquer the land and that they can beat the people. And that's the kind of attitude that and mindset that they had. But Dan, you see, had a different mindset. They did not think like Joshua and Caleb did. And so they failed to conquer the land and gave up on the land that God had given them. And so now they're seeking out a different land that God did not call them to conquer. And so I'm going to stop right there and just point out that what God has for you is going to have to it's going to have to go down with a fight. Something God is calling for you to do is not going to be easy. And a lot of times when things are easy, we're like, okay, this is not God, or this just can't be. But that's why it's important to be with God each and every day, because things are not going to come easy. And when you're entering into the promised land, you're going to have to put up a fight and take the land by force. I found the verse, and it's actually Matthew 11:12. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. And you see, Dan and them, they got intimidated because people that are violent, people that are wicked, are in the land that God has promised us. And so the kingdom of heaven suffers because there's people that are stronger that are in the land, occupying the land. But God is calling us to take it by force, to take that thing back by force. And so Dan had not fully taken the land God gave them in Joshua 19. Instead of fighting for their God assigned territory, they go searching for an easier route. And spiritually, this represents that the Danites weren't content with what God had assigned them. And so they looked for something that seemed easier. So instead of walking in obedience, they just seized any opportunity that they can get. And so not every opportunity is from the Lord. And when they sought out this other land, it ended up leading them down into idolatry. And so this was also a land that looked good to them and it seemed good, but it wasn't of God. And there's a lot of things in this world today that looks good, that seems good. And we're like, okay, that's God because, God is good. But that's where deception comes. And the enemy, what does it say? He comes masquerading like an angel of light. But he is deceptive and he's coming to steal, kill, and destroy and to deceive you. And so many are building platforms, ministries, or lifestyles that use God's name but are not grounded in his word. Christianity is popular, but God is calling his people to return to holiness, truth, and obedience. So this is like also representing that a lot of people are watering down Christianity, are not actually devoting themselves to God, devoting their whole lives to God, but they're just doing it as something that looks good and because everybody else is doing. But God sees through that. You can't fool God. You can't. And so when they disobeyed God and tried to go another route, an easier route, God's presence left them and they became corrupted and became they also started to worship other idols other than God. They were still thinking that they were doing what God has called them to do. They were still thinking that they can still use God's name in the midst of their disobedience. And that is, something that we gotta take from it, is that when we fail to do what God is calling for us to do and we want to do our own thing, God is not gonna sign off on that. God is not gonna endorse that, because that's not his will. And when we're out of God's will, we're gonna have to sustain it, but also that's gonna come with corruption, deception, that's gonna come with things God never intended for us to go through. And that's what the tribe of Dan suffered from. They pursued comfort over obedience. They built religion around what worked, not by what God said. And they allowed fear to determine their boundaries. And this whole thing, like, I've been trying to read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, like, and because there's something about reading the Bible from the beginning to end, because you're able to see God's goodness. You're able to see how God has his mercy and how he shows up and how he still redeems through the sin of the Israelites, And God was just showing me, this was just such an opener for me, because this was when the people were crossed into the promised land. So these people were in the promised land, but they still failed to conquer the land God had called for them to conquer, because they didn't want to put up a fight. And we think crossing into the promised land, it's going to be all peaches, sunshines, and rainbows. But God is showing us that no, you're still going to have to fight for what I'm giving you. You're still going to have to put up a fight. But it's a fixed fight. That's the thing. It's a fixed fight. But the people, the tribe of Dan, got too intimidated. You know why? It's because they were trying to do it themselves. They saw that they couldn't do it, and they didn't realize that it wasn't God trying for them to think that they can do it. It was him trying for them to realize that you're going to need me. And the only way you're going to be able to do this, if you lean on me, if you depend on me. And that's what Joshua and Caleb realized. They realized that, yeah, the promised land looks big and intimidating, like the people are giant, but they knew that their God was bigger. They knew that the God that they served was bigger than the obstacle ahead of them. And so they were able to conquer the land. And so I'm asking you, are you depending on yourself for this breakthrough, for you to move this mountain? Or are you depending on God? Because we can say one thing, but our actions are showing something else, You can say you trust God, but, on the other hand, you're trying to control the outcome of everything. You're trying to control everything. But God is calling for us in this season to depend on him. Throughout the Bible, throughout all that I've been reading, Genesis up to Judges, God is just calling for his people to depend on him. To depend on him, to seek him. That's all he's calling for us to do. And that he's going to fight the battles. He's going to deliver us from the things we need delivering from. We just have to obey. When it's hard, when it looks like there's no way, God is still asking us to obey. And so I know it's easier said than done, but God knows that we're capable of doing it, and God is trying to build up a warrior in you. He's trying to build you up, because the world can tear you apart just like that. The world can make you forget who you are, a child of God, just like that. But God is calling us to be strong. He's calling us to be courageous. He's calling us to look at the situation as bigger than him, but look at God as bigger. He's capable. We may not be, and we not, but God is capable. And so I encourage you guys to read Judges 18 and see how the tribe of Dan, they failed to conquer the land God had called for them to conquer because of fear, because they let themselves get intimidated by the people that were occupying it. And so they sought a land that was easier, which led to them being corrupted, which led to idolatry, which led to them being disobedient to God. And one thing I just want you guys to take away from this video is that whatever God is doing in your life, wants to do in your life, God's promises are not always going to be easy. But God is calling us to be strong and courageous, and God is calling us to lean on him, to trust in him, and to be obedient anyways. We have to have that Caleb spirit. When he said that we can conquer the land, we can surely do this. We have to go with that spirit into the world. And we cannot compromise. We cannot let the world corrupt us. God's instructions are not always going to make sense, but we're called to obey anyways. So God is seeking for an obedient heart. He's seeking for us. He's wanting for us to give him our total surrender because he deserves it. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he got us doing. We just got to trust and obey. I love you guys, and I pray this video encourage you guys. I pray that you'll have a blessed and beautiful day. See y'all in the next video.